Phyllis Murphy left this house just after 6:30 on the night of the 22nd of December. She had called here to see her workmate Barbara to arrange to go to a dance later that night. She left the house and walked up to the bus stop opposite the Cadine Hotel. That was the last time anyone saw her.
On Saturday the 22nd of December 1979, Phyllis Murphy would disappear from a bus stop in Kildare town and never be seen again. Her disappearance would haunt the family and community for the next 20 years, until 1999 when it would finally be solved. This would be thanks to the dedication of the Garda Síochána, never letting it turn into a cold case. Kildare town was a lot smaller then. It would have been more of a village back then in 1979. Everyone knew everyone. But it wasn't isolated, as Dublin would have been only a 46-minute drive, and you also had access to the Wicklow Mountains. Phyllis was the third last in the family of 10, 7 girls and 3 boys. Her mother said she was a quiet baby and would sleep a lot, especially if there was music playing. She was a very kind and gentle girl growing up. She loved babies and small children, and she would call to the neighbours to ask if she could bring their baby out for a walk. As she got older, then she would babysit for the neighbours, which earned her pocket money, and she even went to Lourdes one year to help with the disabled. When she got older, she moved out of the family home and got a job in Curran Knitwear Factory in Newbridge, County Kildare, as a cutter. She would cut the patterns for the clothes and she took great pride in her work. But as a seamstress, if you made a mistake, you'd be nearly afraid to tell her. But she would sort it out with a smile on her face though. She was very motherly and a rock of sense for a 23-year-old. In the summer of 1979, when Pope John Paul came to Ireland, Phyllis went to see him in Dublin. Because of the visit of the Pope, if you check the name on the birth registry, you'll find John, Paul and Paula were the main choice of names for this year. Irish people were very driven back then in their Irish Catholic faith. On the 22nd of December 1979, Phyllis headed into Kildare town to do some last-minute Christmas shopping. And the big thing for the day was she got her first perm. And for you ladies out there from an older generation like myself, we all remember getting our first perm, and it was a big thing. 1, you were in fashion. 2, it took hours. 3, it was pure torture. 4, you'd nearly pass out with the smell of the chemicals. And 5, it didn't settle down until at least the 3rd wash. But Phyllis, she was delighted with herself, as the people she met that day confirmed. But the important people in her life would never get to see her new hairstyle, including her best friend Barbara O'Kelly.
I never saw the perm. She wanted to change and a new look for Christmas.
Who Phyllis had called on that day before she was to get the bus home. But Barbara was not at home that day, as she had gone into town to change a pair of shoes. Barbara's mother would be the last to see Phyllis as she walked her to the gate to wave her off to get the 6:30 p.m. bus. The bus stop was only 40 to 50 yards down the road from Barbara's house, but Phyllis would never get that bus. Barbara and Phyllis were to meet up later that night at around 9 p.m. to go to a disco. They were to meet Phyllis's father at the local pub and then head on to the CWYS, as it's known as now. There was no sign of Phyllis when Barbara turned up, so she headed down to her sister's house to see if Phyllis was there, but she wasn't, and that is when they knew something was wrong. Back then, because not many people had phones, you always were where you said you'd be, and you'd always say where you were going, and were always on time, so automatically there was concern as to where Phyllis was. Back then, people would thumb a lift a lot, and I often did myself. But Phyllis was the type that she would take the bus or would only take a lift if it was someone she knew really well. Like I said earlier, she was a rock of sense. Sometimes I look back and I wonder how I survived the 70s and 80s. It definitely was a more innocent and freer life, and you didn't think of these things happening in little old Ireland. It wasn't until the next morning, the 23rd of December, that Phyllis's brother called to the Garda station in Kildare town to report her missing. Despite it being out of character for Phyllis to not be in contact, there was no urgency. An announcement was made on Christmas Eve on the radio to look out for her, and it wasn't until Christmas Day that the family really knuckled down to get out there. Soon the Gardaí, civil defence and community were all out in force. Philis's brother headed out to the nearby Curragh Plains to look for her. A total of 3,000 people were on the search. At the time it was one of the hardest winters ever recorded, but people continued looking for Philis. 8 days in and there was no sign. People and businesses donated their time, food, hot tea and warm clothing to the search party. It was like one big family looking for her. A diviner also came forward to help with the search. For those of you that don't know what a diviner is, it's a person who practices an ancient art that can be learned once you have an open mind. It is used to find water, people, objects, minerals, geopathic stresses and black streams. Sticks, rods and crystals among other items can be used to find these. This particular diviner said he thought Philis could be in the area of Old Kilcullen, County Kildare, and she may be alive, but alas he would be wrong. As the search continued over the next few weeks, Philis's glove would be found with the bus fare inside, along with the belt of her coat, all located on the Curragh Plain, halfway between Kildare town and Newbridge. Then on the outskirts of Kildare town, Philis's boots were found, and the Gardaí knew that this was not looking good. The search was then widened to the Wicklow Mountains, leading to further key discoveries. In Brannockstown, Philis's Christmas presents were found, thrown in over a wall. The Gardaí continued their search through Hollywood and onto Ballinagee Bridge. On the Kildare side of the bridge is where, on the 18th of January 1980, Philis's body would be found, 40 kilometres from Kildare town, where she was last seen at the bus stop. Philis's two brothers identified her body and returned home to the rest of the family. The sisters asked if she was wearing clothes and the brothers said yes, but then it came on the radio that she was found naked 15 feet from the road, and an attempt was made to hide her body with twigs. The brothers were very upset with this announcement because they wanted to protect their family of the true horror of Philis's death.
The body was found just before 12 o'clock today, lying in woodland about 15 feet from the side of the main Hollywood to Turlock Hill Road, a mile from Wicklow Gap. The woman was naked and an attempt, using twigs, had been made to hide the body from view.
Philis had been badly beaten, raped and strangled. She had over 30 injuries to her body. She fought for her life. It snowed the next day, and if it had done so any time before, she probably would never have been found. Philis was fully intact and preserved because it had been so cold. The family were so glad she was found and they had a body to bury. They had a closed coffin as she was so badly beaten. It was a huge funeral, everyone turned out for it. The murder investigation began straight away, and like I said earlier, the body was fully intact and preserved, and the forensics were able to recover blood, semen and other samples. The Gardaí went door to door with a questionnaire asking people did they know Philis, and if they did, when did they last see her. One person that was questioned was John Creer, who worked as a security guard in the Black & Decker factory in Kildare. He was married with 2 children at the time and was to start his night shift at 8 p.m, the night Philis disappeared, which his friend John Bulger supported, giving him an alibi. He was older than Philis, had a great interest in horse racing. He liked going to the pub and he was never in trouble with the Gardaí. As part of the murder investigation, men from the locality gave blood samples as a way of elimination. This included John Creer. These men that gave blood samples unknowingly in turn gave their DNA. DNA technology was well in its infancy and it didn't bring the Gardaí any closer to the killer. The family made an appeal on TV, but no new witnesses came forward and no new information was given.
The killer is still on the loose, and he's reminded of it as much as we are, much more.
I think it's worse that we feel we know him, you know.
I wonder how would he feel if his sister, if it happened to his sister, or his mother, or father. I wonder how would he feel. Go along there and find his sister murdered? Or has he any conscience?
The family were terrified that this was going to turn into a cold case. The Gardaí suffered backlash for not getting the case solved, and every day they heard, "Ah yeah, you do this, that and the other, but you can't solve who killed Philis Murphy." They heard it for years. Many Gardaí retired over the years and had to leave the case behind professionally, but they didn't let it leave their hearts. When the blood and swabs were done and tested for the purpose of elimination, the samples were kept. The Gardaí didn't know at the time that keeping the samples and the development of the DNA technology would end up solving the murder 20 years later. In 1999, the samples taken from Philis and the samples from the local men were sent to the UK to see if they could establish a match. And a while later, they got a phone call to say a match was found. The name given was John Creer. The Gardaí informed the family, and when they heard the name, they recognised it, as Philis would have babysat for the Creers, as did the sisters. Of course, Creer would deny knowing Philis in later interviews. On the 13th of July 1999, Gardaí went to a stud farm where Creer was working as a security guard, and he was arrested on the spot for murder. He was shocked and was very quiet and looked defeated. He now also was a father of 5 children. People in the community were shocked and so angry. He was brought for interview and then to Naas District Court to be officially charged. People gathered at the courthouse to see the man that not only took Philis's life, but was the cause of so many men in the town having to live under suspicion for the last 20 years. After Creer was formally charged at Naas District Court, the Gardaí finally were able to piece together what happened to poor Philis that night. On the day she was abducted, Creer was in town helping his wife do the shopping in Newbridge. After he returned home, he headed out for a few pints in the local pub before work at 8 p.m. When he left the pub, he was passing the bus stop where Philis was waiting, and he stopped to give her a lift. She must have said yes, as she knew him and she had quite a few parcels to carry. There was no witnesses or signs of a struggle at the bus stop. Creer drove Philis onto the Curragh Plains, stopped the car, and Philis made a run for it, knowing already she was in trouble. This is where she would drop her glove with her bus fare in it, and he grabbed the belt on the back of her coat and it tore, which was also found. It is thought that this is where he beat, raped and strangled her and put her body into the boot of the car and drove to the Wicklow Mountains. He discarded her clothes and Christmas presents along the way, and finally he would discard her body just beyond Ballinaghee Bridge. On the 8th of October 2002, Creer 54 would go on trial at the Justice Criminal Court in Dublin, and the trial would go on for 5 weeks. The prosecution fought tooth and nail to get the jury to find him guilty. Everyone was worried about the DNA, as it was a new type of evidence, and they were hoping the jury would accept it as a major proof that Creer was the killer. John Bulger admitted that Creer did not turn up for work that night until around 9:30 p.m, and that he cleaned out the boot of his car that night after claiming he had spilt milk in it. The jury found him guilty, and the family, friends, Gardaí and even the bus driver that should have picked Philis up that night all cried with happiness. Creer was sentenced to life in prison. Creer was a well-respected family man that had a good career in the army, and after leaving the army worked as a security guard. He had a wife and 5 children and liked a quiet pint in his local pub. He was totally unassuming to the people around him, or was he? As of 2022, Creer is still in prison. When he was arrested in 1999, he was questioned when several women had come forward, accusing him of sexual assault and rape of minors and young teenagers, and of course he denied the allegations. Only one 18-year-old at the time has not withdrawn the allegations, but as it stands to this day, no charges have been brought against him. The ballistics officer who researched into DNA that led to the breakthrough in Philis's case confirmed that he does not think this is a one-off murder for Creer. He said, "I don't think he committed this murder and then stopped, and I don't think it was his first either." I don't want to get too deep into these theories of what Creer has or has not done. That, I think, is for another video. This is Philis' story, and I'll end it with a quote from her sister Barbara Turner. "We didn't want her forgotten. We wanted the true story of what she was really like to come out. We never wanted it to be just another murder case.